Welcome to the Gridiron Expert. I'm Connor Hibbett. We're doing something new on the channel this year. We are giving you 2025 team previews to give you the best in-depth analysis that you want for the upcoming season. And today, we're going to be looking at the Georgia Bulldogs. And joining me on the show today is Jordan Hill. Jordan, how are you doing?
Doing great, Connor. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. So tell us before we get going here, your affiliation with the Dogs and where our viewers can find your content.
Definitely Dogs 24/7, the part of the 24/7 Sports Network. So you can go to dogs247.com. We got a great team there with myself, Kip Adams, Benjamin Wolk, Olivia Sayer. Go to our YouTube, Dogs 24/7. Go to our TikTok at the same name and check out our podcast, the Junkyard Dogcast.
Awesome, awesome. So the Georgia football program has been one of the best programs in the country, obviously the last several years. But just like with Georgia, as there is a lot of questions with a number of the top teams this year, and which could be a chaotic season. I'll get back to that because that could be a pretty interesting discussion in itself. But Georgia has a lot of questions, at least in terms of who's going to be stepping up into certain roles. Now with Georgia, probably take it a little bit with a grain of salt compared to most teams in the country. So let's get going with the quarterback position. Is it the Gunnar Stockton era in Athens now?
I think so, Connor. It's one of those situations where Kirby Smart and the coaches haven't outright said that it's Gunner's job, but just based on everything we saw in practice, everything we heard behind the scenes, fully expect Gunner Stockton to be the starter. You know, he's the guy that stepped up in a big way in the second half of that SEC championship game. Played well in that game and had a pretty good showing in the Notre Dame game in the Sugar Bowl as part of the playoff. And he's been pushed by Ryan Puglisi, who is a redshirt freshman. But just given Gunner's experience, given what the offense looked like, especially in the second half and overtime of that Texas game, I think it's going to be Gunner Stockton's show, and it's just going to be fascinating to follow what Gunner does. He's a guy with a big arm. I think we saw that in the two games he played in last season. It's going to be just sort of the little things and how he handles being a starting quarterback, which is still new to him at this level. I think it will be Gunnar Stockton. They haven't come out and said that, but I fully expect that by the time the season gets here.
What do you think the ceiling is for Stockton this season? Do you think he could be a top 10 quarterback in the country, or is this do your job and let the players around you make you that much better?
Yeah, I would say more than likely, I would say his ceiling is maybe top 20 quarterback in the country, which is still fine and which I think is good enough for this Georgia team to win the national championship. It's a situation for me with Gunner. It's going to be just making the right decisions all the time, not putting the ball in harm's way. He talked about after the Sugar Bowl, just being able to process faster. That he even felt, in that game that he wasn't making decisions quite quick enough, which I don't think is really any reason for concern. I mean, that was a really good Notre Dame defense he was going against. And again, that was his first career start at this level. So I think Gunner can get the job done. I know fans are anxious to see what he does. I don't know necessarily if he can play like one of the best quarterbacks, and I'm not anticipating him to be a first team All SEC kind of quarterback, but I do think he can be an above average quarterback in the conference and that he can do what is needed to be done for Georgia to contend.
And the SEC all around should have better quarterback play this year as well. So yeah, it'll be a difficult task to be first or second team All SEC like you mentioned. But speaking in regard to the players around him, let's look at the receivers real quick. So last year, I felt like Georgia had a lot of gadgety kind of receivers, if that's the correct term there. But I feel like this year they have more upside in terms of the route running. Where do you think? The number one, number two guys are going to be who's the alpha? Are there any alphas? What does the room look like this year?
I think it looks significantly different than it did a year ago, and I think that Kirby Smart, Mike Bobo, the offensive coordinator, James Coley, the receivers coach, they all deserve a lot of credit for making rebuilding the receiver room a huge priority. Thought they did a great job of it. The guy that I think is going to be the leading receiver is Zachariah Branch, the receiver they got from USC. He was a freshman All-American a couple years ago. Didn't have the 2024 that he wanted, but he hit the ground running this spring in Athens. I think that he's poised in the slot to make a lot of plays. And when you look at the receiver room last year, I felt like the explosive plays they made, a lot of those were downfield shots and being able to make catches. Arian Smith, Dylan Bell had some of that. I think with Zachariah Branch, there's going to be a lot of yards after catch, and I think that's as impressed as I am with Gunnar Stockton's arm. He can throw it deep and he's got pretty good accuracy. I think getting Zachariah Branch and having an 8 yard pass turn into a 25-yard pass, things like that. I expect that to be something we see quite a bit. Some of the other receivers, Colby Young, a receiver they got from Miami a couple of years ago, big body, 6'3", 6'4". They went and got Noah Thomas from Texas A&M this offseason. He's like 6'5". I think you're going to see quite a bit of them on the outside. And it kind of goes even from there. I mean, they bring back Dylan Bell, who I think had a little bit of a disappointing 2024, but he's going to play a big role and probably kind of play sort of like the Debo Samuel, which he did a couple years ago, play a little bit of running back, just be sort of a weapon on this offense. And then we're not even touching on the five true freshmen they signed. They've got a really good class of guys, probably headlined by Talon Taylor and CJ Wiley. I think you're going to see a lot of rotation in those receivers, but to me, the top guys are very clearly Zachariah Branch, Colby Young, Noah Thomas. I think they're going to get the ball quite a bit this fall.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of those true freshmen. Some sites actually have them listed in the two deep. So, are we going to be seeing them a decent amount in the field this season?
I think so. And I think it goes back to what I think is more of Georgia's philosophy, what they'd like to do at receiver. I think about the 2022 season that they would rotate guys in quite a bit. And I think that, especially CJ Wiley, I think CJ's like 6'4", had a really good spring, had a one-handed catch for about 35 yards in the spring game. I think that they want to get those guys involved. And I think they are very deep at receiver, even after losing Nitro Tuggle after spring practice. He transferred to Purdue. I mean, I'll throw out another guy too that I haven't mentioned, London Humphreys, a guy that was at Vanderbilt 2 years ago. Played a decent bit last year. I don't think he was quite as productive as some people expected, but I think it's going to be a situation where London doesn't start among those receivers or maybe doesn't start as much as people would expect, but I think he's going to be a huge piece of this offense. I think they are going to go very deep in this receiver room, and I think that's going to be the benefit of Gunnar Stockton and really this entire offense.
So it sounds like the Georgia receivers might be at least one of the most improved position groups on the team for this fall.
I'd say it is the most improved position, and I think they deserve a lot of credit, the coaching staff, for making that a priority. That was a receiver room, Connor, last year, led the nation in drops. And,
Yeah.
and think about the fact that Georgia still won the SEC in spite of that. If you look at the rankings, I think the next team up was UAB. And that's not really a team you want to be compared to when it comes to offense right now. So, no, I think the receiver room is the most improved part of this team, and I think that's going to be clear by the time we get into SEC play and they kind of turn these guys loose and let them go make plays.
And it sounds like Noah Thomas might be one of those throw it up to him and he'll come down with 50-50 balls and it's more like 80-20 with him.
Yeah, I mean, I think him and Colby Young both. I think both of those guys have a chance to be red zone go-tos for Gunnar Stockton. And I thought it was funny during spring practice. A guy I didn't mention that I also think will get some good run is Sakovi White, who is just going to be a sophomore. And he said, you put Noah Thomas at X and you put Colby Young at Z or vice versa, put them on the outside. He's like, what is a secondary going to do? I mean, you've got to stop guys that are, 2, 3, 4 inches taller than you, and both those guys have really good ball skills. Really interested just to see what they do specifically in the red zone, because then you also factor in a guy like Oscar Delp, who is also a really big body there at tight end. I think Gunnar Stockton's got a lot to work with, really on the whole field, but especially in the red zone.
And the tight ends, so I'm glad you brought them up. Do you think this might be the best tight end room in the country?
Not really knowing offhand some of the other classes, some of the other groups. It'd kind of be hard for me to say. I do know that this is an incredibly deep room. I think it's a room that a lot of teams would kill for like the third tight end who, the way it's set up right now, Oscar Delp will be the starter. Lawson Lucky's going to play quite a bit. And then one of the breakout guys of spring practice was Jaden Riddell. He's just a sophomore. Didn't play very much last year, but He was a guy that showed up for Orange Bowl prep when they were getting ready to play Florida State, and there started being pictures of this guy who looked, 4 or 5 inches taller than everybody around him, and it's like, okay, who is this guy?
Yeah.
And he didn't play. He didn't play a ton last year, but had a great spring, and I think he's poised to play quite a bit. And then we're not even talking about the true freshmen, Isaiah Williams, Ethan Barbour. I don't know how much those two freshmen will play, but they have already really impressed behind the scenes. It is an incredibly deep room, and yeah, it's always hard for me to kind of compare to other programs just because I don't know quite, who are the top tight end rooms in the country, things like that. I know Todd Hartley, the tight ends coach, is sitting on a gold mine in Athens, and he continues to recruit the position well. And I think, even after 2025, they will reload and have one of the deepest rooms at that position again.
Sounds like in the pass catching department, it's an embarrassment of riches. It's
For sure, for sure.
yeah, this
And
is
to
awesome.
and to that point, I've been asked like, okay, who is the player to watch really on either side of the ball? And I've named a few different guys, but it all kind of boils down to Gunnar Stockton. Like the pieces are there, especially in the pass game, to set him up for success. And you can't expect him to play perfect. There's probably going to be ups and downs, especially again, when they play against Marshall in the season opener. That's only his second career start. But they've done a very good job. They have spared no expense at getting talent around him and putting him in position to succeed. It's just going to be on him to do it.
And it would obviously help Stockton if the running game were to improve to where it used to be just a couple years ago. Do you think the running game will make leaps and bounds of improvement this year, or is it going to be minimal, you think?
I think they'll make gains. It's hard to say how much, again, because I'm really fascinated to see what sort of the pass run breakdown winds up being on this offense because they wound up, being really pass happy last season. I think a good bit of that was out of necessity because they just felt like they couldn't run the ball like they wanted to. And statistically, that was the worst run game in the time that Kirby Smart has been the head coach at Georgia. I think they finished 15th in the SEC in rushing yards per game, which you just don't expect that at Georgia. But I think they're in position to run the ball better. Getting Nate Frazier back, he was a leading rusher last year. I think he is your lead back. They go get Josh McCray from Illinois.
That's a great pickup.
Really like him, watched his film and wrote about him over at Dogs 24/7. Really physical back. I think he brings what was sort of missing from last year's offense because he's sort of that thunder to Nate Frazier's lightning. And it's a situation where they just didn't have that power back last year, and it was because of injury. Roderick Robinson would have filled that role. He was dealing with a foot injury, missed all but basically a game and a half of last season. And then Branson Robinson was banged up. Branson has since transferred to Georgia State. But to have McCray should have Roderick Robinson back by fall camp. Bo Walker, a true freshman, one of the guys that got the most buzz during spring practice, a guy that is basically going to command snaps because of how well he's played. They got other backs as well. Chauncey Bowens, who's a sophomore, played quite a bit. Impressed quite a bit during spring practice. Some other backs as well. Cash Jones, who has used quite a bit on third downs last season. So I think they're in shape to run the ball better. To me, the bigger question is with the offensive line, as it is the
Yeah.
running backs, it's can they run block well, which was by far their biggest weakness last year. Um, but I do think they've got the talent in that room to move the ball better, and I think that Josh McCray pickup's going to prove very valuable.
I agree with the McCray take there. I when I saw him transfer to Georgia, I'm like, that's an undervalued transfer there. He's not going to get as much hoopla as like the guy that just transferred to Syracuse, Jonte Cook from Washington. He's going to probably get more discussion than McCray would, but McCray might actually have more production than Jonte Cook does. Well, I mean, we'll obviously see this fall, but yeah, McCray is certainly a quality pickup. But you just mentioned the offensive line, so let that be the transition to the guys up front. So I believe there's four starters to replace from last year's bunch. Um, do you think that the new group here has a high ceiling, or do you think that there's still some questions to determine exactly what their ceiling is this year?
I think they have a high ceiling. It's just one of those things I think everyone around the Georgia program is still trying to wrap their head around, trying to play better on the offensive line after you lose three guys who were drafted, another one who got an undrafted free agency deal. I mean, last year's offensive line was supposed to be a strength, and it just wasn't. I think a big part of that, though, was injury, missing guys, guys playing through injury, trying to grit it out, and just not quite playing up to the level. They bring them back the one starter that's Ernest Green, but to kind of complicate it, he started at left tackle each of the last two seasons, and now he's playing right tackle. So the one guy that you do know is coming back is playing a new position. Now, based on everything we heard from him and from coaches and what we heard behind the scenes, I think he handled that transition well. But that is something to watch. And what really complicated sort of getting a feel for this offensive line in the spring is injuries and guys coming off season surgeries. Monroe Freeling, who's going to be the starting left tackle, he was out after having a labrum repair, but he'll be back for for fall camp rather, and I think he'll be the locked in as the left tackle. Daniel Calhoun, who I think will be the starting right guard, he had a foot injury a little bit after the halfway point of spring practice, so he kind of had to shut it down. But he's expected to be back by fall camp and to be 100% by then. So I like this offensive line. It's one of those things that it's kind of hard for me to say, yeah, they'll play better because, the line last year was supposed to be a Joe Moore award type of an offensive line, and it just wasn't. And if it was injuries, if it was something else behind the scenes, it's hard to say. I do like this collection of talent. Having Monroe Freeling, you got Micah Morris back at left guard. He's a guy that's kind of rotated between the two guard positions. Finally gets his chance to start now. Drew Bobo, Mike Bobo's son, who has also sort of waited in the wings, played a little bit last year when the starting center Jared Wilson got hurt. Heard fantastic things about Drew Bobo. I think people are kind of quick to be like, oh, they gave a coach's son a scholarship. I watched him back in the day when he was at Auburn High in Alabama, and he played really well. And I think he's come a long way since getting to Georgia. Daniel Calhoun, who I mentioned, I think he'll play well as a sophomore. And then Ernest Green, as long as he can stay healthy, I think he'll man that right tackle position and play really well.
So, given all the new faces, you're not really concerned. Do you feel like this group has a pretty high floor, and it's just a matter of how great can they be?
Yeah, I'm fascinated, especially. I like the fact that with the way the schedule sets up, this offensive line and really Gunnar Stockton too get a little bit of runway. They start with Marshall, they start with Austin P before they wind up having to go to Tennessee. So I'll be watching that offensive line really closely. How's the communication? How's the line holding up as a whole? I think it's a line that Georgia should feel confidence in. Now, is it good enough to win like a Joe Moore Award? I think they would probably be hard pressed to do that given that they've had some really talented lines in the past and come up short of that. But I do think that line can play better, and some of the games they have on the schedule, they're going to have to.
Yeah, and actually, some of the SEC squads here on the schedule have some questions regarding the interior of their defensive lines. Like Tennessee loses a lot of production in the middle. Their edge rushers should be really good though. Kentucky loses a lot of their best defensive linemen. Auburn loses a lot in the interior. Ole Miss lost a couple of their best defensive linemen. So yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a path here, like you mentioned, obviously in Marshall and Austin P in the non-conference to start things off. So the calling card for Georgia the last handful of years has been the defense. It's going to be a relatively younger group than what it's been the last few years, but still, obviously, a ton of talent. So when you look towards the defensive line, we'll start things off there on the side of the football. Where do you see, like, do you see like any alphas, like dudes that are just going to take over? Or is this going to be more like they're going to take over they're going to be like complete as a unit. They're going to do their job. I mean, obviously it's Georgia. You take it with a grain of salt when you say that they don't have like, a first team All-American. But do you see any guys like breaking out here?
I think it's going to be one where you get multiple guys really step up and play well as a unit. Now, if I pointed to one guy who could do that and also who Georgia would love to do that, it's Christian Miller, defensive tackle that I think is going to be a starter and played really well last season. Battled through a shoulder injury, got hurt. I think that was the UMass game, missed some time, and was basically like, I'm coming back for the Sugar Bowl. I played through the pain, had 5 tackles, batted a pass at the line. And that defensive line, to me, when you look at it on the whole, especially Christian Miller, when people talk about what's it going to take for Georgia to get back to, they've had good defenses the last few years, but it has not been that 2021, 2022 just absolutely dominating defenses. And
Those are
to
high
me,
bars
it's
to clear too.
exactly, exactly. And with a fan base like Georgia, they want to get back to that, whether that's realistic or not. We can talk about that later, but it's all about the defensive line. They need guys to dominate. When you look at the best defenses Georgia's had, against the run, they've been unstoppable. I mean, they've been, like the first in rushing defense, maybe third in rushing defense those 2 years, and the last few years they've been like top 30, which is still good, which has put Georgia in position to say win the SEC championship like they did last season. But it's not been just outright domination and to me, that starts with the defensive line. And Christian Miller, to me, is that key guy. But I'll shout out some of the other people. Gabe Harris, a guy that has bided his time. I think he's got a chance as a junior to be the starting defensive end on this line. Georgia employs a 3-4 defense, so those three defensive linemen. I'd also shout out Joseph Jonah Ajonye, who played a decent bit as a freshman last year before he got hurt before the Texas game and had his season cut short. Watching for Christian Miller, a guy I'll shout out who I think will probably be behind him, but will get some good run. 5-star true freshman Elijah Griffin. This guy has been impressive since he got on campus. He was a guy that I think they were excited about and thought that he could get in the mix early on. Don't know that he'll necessarily be starting, but Georgia does such a good job of rotating on the defensive front. You'll see a lot of Elijah Griffin this year. One of the key guys who really has to step up on this defense, Jordan Hall, who I think is going to be the starting nose tackle, a guy that was banged up last season, didn't really play the role he wanted to just because of injury, was dealing with similar injuries to both of his legs and kept fighting through it. And he's a guy that I think had a great spring, a guy that they understand has to step up and play a big role, replacing a guy like Nazir Stackhouse, who I thought did a fantastic job in the middle of the defensive line the last few years. But I do think Jordan Hall is up for the challenge. He was a guy that I think wound up in our 24/7 sports rankings being Georgia's highest signee in his respective class. I think there's a lot of excitement about Jordan Hall, but he's going to have his hands full going up against some of these SEC offensive lines, and super excited to see how he does against them.
So when I look at this defensive line, you mentioned they're very deep, and they are. They could be. They're going to be returning most of their guys, I think, for next year, right? From this bunch. I mean, I see freshmen. I mean, they're mostly underclassmen outside of Christian Miller. I'm looking at the three deep here. Is Miller about like the only like defensive tackle that's not a freshman or a sophomore?
Miller and Hall would probably be the two names to watch, and looking at as soon as we come off the 2025 draft, everybody immediately wants to know, okay, who's going to leave in 2026? Who are the names to know? And Christian Miller, to me, is one of a couple Georgia players who have a legitimate chance to go in the first round in 2026. So that might be something you have to replace, but I think Georgia would take that because it would mean Christian Miller had a really, really good season and probably played really well in that defensive front.
Yeah, and it'd be one of those like you return quantity, you might lose like one or two quality pieces, but the ceiling might even be higher for 2026 for the defensive line, but it still has a very high ceiling this year. So it feels like it's similar to the offensive line, some new faces, but guys are going to step up and become household names by the time that we get to week 5, week 6, week 7, and then obviously going into next year. So certainly a really high ceiling for the defensive line. The linebackers kind of similar to the defensive line. They lose some of their top playmakers from last year. CJ Allen, I believe, is the lone returnee from the top four in terms of production. Allen actually graded out as one of the top run defenders in the nation last year. And then are there pretty high expectations for Raylan Wilson?
For sure. Raylan's a guy that he came in the same signing class as CJ Allen. And Raylan, if I'm not mistaken, was our number one linebacker in the country in that class. And he's a guy that's super athletic. I think it's just taken him a little bit of time to learn what is expected of you at the inside linebacker position at Georgia. And I think he's come a long way. I thought in the last month of his sophomore season that it really felt like it was becoming more natural to him, reading plays, reacting to plays. And it's one of those things we talked about how deep the tight end room is. It's just an embarrassment of riches right now in the inside linebacker room because you got CJ Allen, Raylan Wilson. I think both of those guys are your starters. Behind them, you got two five stars in Chris Cole and Justin Williams. Chris Cole's a guy that played quite a bit last year, and honestly, more than I expected. Third down packages, getting him on the field any way you can. I think he's going to kind of fill the role that Jalen Walker has filled the last few years, where he gets in on those third down packages. Sometimes he's kind of used just strictly as a pass rusher. But Chris Cole's a guy that I think, when it's all said and done, will be a first round pick out of Georgia. And then Justin Williams, it's kind of a similar situation with him and Raylan Wilson where Justin was, I think, the top linebacker in his signing class. He was definitely ranked over Chris Cole just in our 24/7 sports rankings. And Justin played on special teams some as a true freshman. Didn't quite play on defense as much as Chris Cole. But Justin had a fantastic spring, made a lot of plays. He led both teams in tackles at the spring game. I really don't envy Glenn Schumann, who's the defensive coordinator, but also the inside linebackers coach, for what he has to do as far as splitting up snaps because he's got a lot of guys that are ready to play. And I also just throw in too, we're talking inside linebacker, but outside linebacker, they go get Elo Madozie from Army, Elo Madozie. Got to make sure and get his name right.
Oh, the pass
Um,
rusher, the really good pass rusher.
yes,
Yeah. Oh, he's really good.
he's going to start. I think he's got a chance to be really special. It's going to take him a little bit of time to adjust to playing in the SEC after being at Army, but I think he'll do really well. And they've got Quintavious Johnson behind him, a guy that is a true freshman, played a good bit on special teams and flashed there. So linebacker in general, they are in really good shape in Athens right now, and it's just it kind of blows my mind, especially in this era where guys want to start and people can be really picky about where they end up. Um, Inside linebacker especially is just ridiculously deep.
You're right, and the ceiling for this unit, honestly, over like the next 2, 3 years, is borderline scary good, actually, because like Chris Cole, Justin Williams, and then they have some like quality freshmen, Zayden Walker, Chris Jones. You mentioned them briefly. There's probably like 95% of teams in the country those guys would be starting for. It's just that Georgia has CJ Allen and Raylan Wilson. Gosh. Okay, so if you read in the preview magazine season, they're gonna say, all right, kind of like how I brought it up. Georgia loses three of their top four linebackers from last year, so we're putting a question mark on this unit. Well, if you look more into it, actually, and this is why we bring guys like you onto the channel because you guys really know your stuff. But yeah, this unit looks like it's going to be one of the best linebacking groups in the entire country, maybe with Texas, given what they return as well. So, yeah, Georgia is going to have arguably the best linebacker unit in the country over the next 2 to 3 years. It looks like. Uh,
Yeah, I mean it's just it's absurd. But Glenn Schumann deserves a lot of credit for how he recruits it, and yeah, they are poised to be in really good shape in the years to come.
that's an amazing room. In the secondary, so both of last year's starting safeties must be replaced. However, though, as a true freshman, KJ Bolden played meaningful snaps and rates as I think, based on PFF, as the top defensive back, at least in the safety room going into this year. And then Dalen Everett played a ton of snaps at corner, and he returns. So what do you think the ceiling is for the secondary? And also, is Daniel Harris going to play one of the corners?
Yeah, so just looking at the secondary on the whole, I'll start at cornerback. They get Dalen Everett back. I think Dalen is a guy that has developed quite a bit in his time at Georgia. I wouldn't be surprised if he's a preseason All SEC pick. He led the team in interceptions last year. He's going to be counted on to be that lockdown corner. And I think if you were saying that a year ago, you might be like, oh, I don't know about that. But he had a great season last year. I would encourage people go watch either Texas game. He was phenomenal against Texas both games. Daniel Harris will be the other corner, a big guy that's like 6'2", that I think kind of had a learning curve last year. He winds up becoming a starter very late in the year, gets inserted in the Tennessee game and was a starter from there, but had a fantastic spring. I think he's poised to be in good shape there. And, they've got some really talented corners behind them. Ellis Robinson, a former five-star, DeMello Jones, who they're really excited about too. I think you'll see a good bit of both of them, but it's going to be Dalen and it's going to be Daniel Harris as the starters. At the star position, which is Georgia's nickelback position, Janelle Aguero is back. I think he's a guy with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. He had to play through injury a few times last year, but he's locked in there. You mentioned KJ Bolden. He's a guy that's just a sophomore, and we talk about what Georgia lost. Very quickly, he's become one of the most experienced guys on this team. And you noticed that during spring. I heard many people talk about Kirby Smart really getting after KJ at practice. And some fans might hear that and kind of panic and be like, well, is everything going well? To me, that says that Kirby's got a lot of trust in KJ and he's counting on him to make plays. And the biggest question with this secondary is going to be the other safety spot. They need someone to step up. I don't think this competition ended in spring practice. I think it's going to continue. The leader is Ja'Cory Thomas, a guy that's a senior that, it's so rare we see this these days, but he's waited his turn at Georgia. He was a guy that many a time when we looked at the portal, I kind of just sat and watched to see if his name popped up, but he stuck around. I thought he had a really good spring. He started at that safety spot alongside KJ at the spring game, but there's other guys pushing for that job. Zion Branch, Zachariah's brother, who also transferred from USC, just looks really impressive physically. Just a big safety. Think he's going to be in the mix. Adrian Maddox, a guy they got from UAB, he made some plays over the course of spring, and then Jaden Harris, another guy they got from the portal out of Miami. I think if they can get that safety position settled, that they've got a whole lot of talent in the secondary and that they're in pretty good shape if they can get that safety position settled, even if it takes a couple games into the season.
Yeah, Zion Branch, you mentioned from USC, he was one of the most physical safeties in the entire country last year. So it looks like Georgia, like for the most part, like they have everything that they need to make a run this season at the national championship, and it's kind of wide open actually at the top of college football this year. There's a number of teams, the most talented teams that are rather young this year, have a lot to replace: Texas, Oregon, Georgia, Ohio State. But Georgia, I mean, they've got to be the deepest team in the country, like because they go three deep at practically every position. Linebacker, it's like four deep, and like they have the top end talent at practically every position. So, do you think Georgia 10-2 last year in the regular season had some injuries? As you mentioned, the running game wasn't its normal dominant self. Do you think that based on the quality guys that they got through the portal, like at receiver, Josh McCray from Illinois, do you think that they are Gunnar Stockton being a really good to great quarterback away from potentially winning the national championship this season?
I'd say that, and again, to go back to that offensive line, if that offensive line can hold up, but yeah, it's so cliche to just boil it down to the quarterback, but I do think that that's sort of what the position is for this Georgia team, that they've got talent. I like the reload they did on offense, and then my how I'd sum up the defense is young but inexperienced, but I mean talented but inexperienced, and just I think you bet on talent and you bet on those guys being able to meet the moment. So a lot of the pressure falls on Gunnar Stockton to live up to the expectations. So it's a lot of pressure, but that's sort of what you sign up for as a quarterback of a team of this level. And to be honest, just what we've talked to Gunnar Stockton since that Texas game, the SEC title game, I kind of think he's perfect for it because based on everything we've seen, he really doesn't let the spotlight bother him. He's just kind of ho hum, sort of understands this is what he's signing up for. Now, going through an entire season is going to be very different. But yeah, I'm looking at Gunnar Stockton. If he plays really well, this team can contend for a national title.
And even in the special teams department, special teams doesn't get talked about a whole lot, but is Thorson, is he healthy?
So the expectation is he should be back around the first game. So my thought is he might not play in a couple of those non-conference games to start. Had the knee injury in the SEC title game, so I think you'll see Drew Miller probably early in the season. But Brett is expected to be back fairly early in the year.
Okay, that's great because I mean, with Thorson and then Peyton Woodring as the place kicker, I mean, this is arguably the best kicker and punter combo or duo in the entire nation. I mean, there's not like a ton of like, wow, like we've got them penciled in as like the number one special teams duo in the country. There's not like a ton of special teams units that you would look towards in terms of like being that high, that elite. But I mean, Georgia has that in the special teams department. So, like you mentioned they're answering some questions on the offensive line and Gunnar Stockton's potential ceiling away from being arguably the best team in the country because they've got what it takes here again to make a run at it this year. So I guess last question here for you, and you've done a really good job today, Jordan. So we really appreciate you being on the channel. Um, what do you think the ceiling is for Georgia? Do you think it's not national championship or bust, but do you think that national championship is like within a pretty manageable realm here for the Bulldogs?
I do, and I think it's as much the talent they bring back and just the talent they have on the whole as it is the schedule. Because you think about last year's schedule, all of their toughest games were on the road. They went to Alabama, really tough loss. They go to Texas and win. They lose at Ole Miss late in the season when they were really banged up. All those games are home games now. Now, that's not a guarantee that Georgia's going to win those games, but it certainly makes things easier. And then we talked about the non-conference. They don't have that Clemson game that they had to start last season. You start with Marshall, you play Austin Peay. Later in the year, you host Charlotte, and then you play Georgia Tech in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. That very easily can be a 4-0 for Georgia, though you got to watch Georgia Tech because that was a heck of a game last year. And then your biggest road games to me at Tennessee. Now we don't know what Tennessee is going to be after Nico left. And then you go at Auburn, an Auburn team that I do think is significantly better. And they really, really could use that win. Hugh Freeze trying to really solidify his standing there, getting Jackson Arnold. That's kind of a proven ground. And, weird things happen in Jordan-Hare, so that will be a tough challenge for Georgia. But I really like how the schedule sets up with the talent Georgia has to go with it. I do think that the ceiling is a national championship. And I was asked about sort of like the expectation. I think fans want to see at least a return to the playoff and a win in the postseason. But there will be a lot of fans that say championship or bust. And just based on what we know about this team, I can't really say it's an unfair, expectation, though it does take quite a bit to get there.
Well, it should be really fun watching Georgia this year, and the dogs might be barking again. So we'll see. And well, again, Jordan, you did a really good job today, and thank you for being on the channel. And we'll do this again next year.
Sounds great.